Welcome back to another episode of the Live Better podcast by Centric Federal Credit Union. I'm your host and Centric social media and marketing specialist, Emma Baines. I'm so excited you're here today. On this podcast, we regularly post new episodes where I'm joined by a guest to chat about all things living better and finances. Subscribe today so you never miss an episode. Today we are joined by Dee Dee Riley, who is Centric's VP of HR, to chat about the things you should do to prepare for a job interview. So, for some of our listeners who may not know who you are, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do here at Centric.
So, my name is Dee Dee Riley. I am Vice President of Human Resources. I have been here for about 8.5 years. Prior to Centric, I was at Ouachita Independent Bank for 15 years. I'm married. I have a husband. His name is Cassidy Riley. And I have 2 little girls, Kenzie and Collins Riley.
Okay. So you got 2 and I got 2.
Yes.
So let's just jump right into this whole job interview thing.
Okay.
Because it can make or break the person who's getting a job or not getting a job. Okay, so job interview is super big deal. So what's the first thing you look for when you're considering a candidate? So the application's on your desk. What's the first thing you're looking for?
The first thing I'm looking for is at their experience.
Okay.
Well, are they employed? Are they not? What previous employment history that they have. But I'm also looking at their like spelling, any grammatical errors or anything like that. It's super important to make sure you're capitalizing what you're supposed to, or, we got an application this week where the applicant put where it says full name, they just put their first name. So usually if I see just the first name, then I'm just going to keep going.
Right.
If, they didn't even put their full name. But you would be surprised at the people that put like where they live, their street, city, state, all of that is not capitalized. All of those things are important. So just make sure when you're filling it out that you capitalize where you're supposed to, you put punctuation where you should. All of those things are important because that piece of paper is the first impression. That's really the first interview, is the application or reviewing the resume.
Yep.
So
I think any employer would agree with that. I mean, when you think about it, they're not going to see your face most likely at all unless that application is okay, So it really is your first impression. And if you blow that, then that's probably it. I have a question. Okay. What do you think? Yes or no?
Okay.
Selfies on resumes.
At first, because I'm old school, so at first I was like, this is weird. Like, I can remember the very first one I got because I was like, oh, that dude really is sure of himself. But nowadays it's pretty common. So it's not, I think it's fine if you do, but I also think it's fine if you don't. It's not, a deal breaker if you don't. At first though, but this was years ago.
Yeah.
Like, this was probably 15 years ago when I saw the first one, and I was just kind of, that's odd. But now it's more common, so it's not as big of a issue.
And I think it kind of helps you put a face to
It does.
the experience and all of that. So
it
that
does.
Probably helps.
Because the number of interviews that we do and applicants and resumes that come across my desk, they run together. So you get confused as to, okay, who is this person? I have to look back at it. Even though I've interviewed them and I've seen their face, I have to go back and look at their resume or application to remember who was that person.
Right.
So if the picture is on there, I think that's great. It helps me anyway.
That's good.
To keep up with who's who.
I never would have thought of it like that because I've never interviewed people. Okay, so for all of our listeners listening right now, get your selfie on your resume.
Yes.
Help you stand out.
That's right.
Okay, so social media is a super big deal. Everybody's got it. Everybody uses it. So how does that play a role in who gets the job and who doesn't?
So that social media is really the second step when we receive an application or a resume, and they, based on that piece of paper, they have kind of what we're looking for, and we are going to start the interview process with that applicant. The next step is checking their social media. So we check all platforms: Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. That's a recent one that we've had to add to our list because what you put out there on social media determines whether you're going to get an interview or not. If you're using foul language or you're posting inappropriate pictures, then we're probably not going to reach out to you, because, you know, we want who you are and who you represent to match with Centric's core values.
Right.
So it's extremely important. I even tell my children, and they're only 8 and 10, but I tell them and they don't have social media, thank the Lord, but I tell them what they put out there is important. I mean, they do have like Messenger Kids, so that's out there. It's a kids platform where they talk to their friends, but once it's out there, it's out there.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's extremely important to remember. And once new hires have come on board, one of the things that I explain to them with social media going forward is that if you wouldn't post it or say it, have a conversation with our CEO, Rodney Parker. I always use your pastor or even your parents. But I know sometimes people may not have parents, they may not have a pastor. So I just say, if you would not post it or want to have the discussion with our CEO, then don't put it out there.
Mm-hmm. So, or if you have to question it at all, it's probably just a no.
Yes. I use that with a lot of stuff, not only social media, but even like dress code and all that. If you wouldn't wear it or if you question it, don't do it.
Right. Yeah, to be safe.
It's a good rule of thumb.
It is. And I mean, it just makes sense too, because here at Centric, we're so involved in the community, and there's so many volunteer opportunities, and all the different departments are in the community. So you really people know our faces. So you really want your presence on social media to match our brand and our culture here.
That's right.
And if it doesn't, then you're probably just not. And I mean, that goes for anywhere that you might would apply to.
That's true. Yep.
So I know a lot of interviews are still done on Zoom. So what advice do you have for Zoom interviews?
So that was really strange to me. When COVID first hit, I had the opportunity to do interviews via Zoom prior to COVID. Well, then when COVID hit, I had to, because, you know, we were all quarantined and working from home. So I didn't have another avenue to interview people. But it worked out so well, I have not gone back to interviewing in person unless it's like the third interview. So what I would recommend is, you know, it's no different than you and I talking right now. If you're coming into the location and you're interviewing face to face, it's no different. So you should dress appropriately, dress professional. A lot of what I've run into on the Zoom interviews is folks will have their children there. It happens more than you would think. Even once they've gone through the first interview with me and I set up second interviews with other managers, those are still done via Zoom. So that I think they think that, oh, I've passed the first interview, so, you know, I have a step ahead. Well, then they'll show up with other managers with their children sitting in their lap or whatever. Zoom interviews should be conducted in the same manner if you're coming to the location that you're going to be working at and doing the interview. So make arrangements prior to, have your pets put away, or, you know, have childcare or what have you, because it is a distraction. It's totally understandable. I interview people all the time that have to do it on their lunch break, in their car, or what have you, or in certain, you know, obviously if they're at home in certain rooms, that's totally fine. It's not a big deal. But make sure that if you don't have time to kind of tidy up the space around you, then you can put a virtual background up.
Right.
I've had interviews before where it literally looked like either there was a chocolate explosion in the car or blood. I'm not sure which one, but it's like I can't focus on the interview because I'm like, what happened in that car? So, you know, they could have put up a virtual background.
You are right.
Note to self. So they need to keep that in mind, that, you know, their surroundings, they can blur those out. So, I think that's about it as far as the Zoom interviews. Any tips or whatever?
Yeah. So, okay. So Zoom or not, what do you think about dress code as far as that goes? Just because I know it's like different generations, people think different things are acceptable, and that's just obvious everywhere you go. So what do you think as far as dress code goes, whether you're in person or on Zoom?
I think it should be the same. I think if you're going to, we had a gentleman, and I don't see this a lot, but he interviewed with a button up and a bow tie, and I was really impressed by that because I don't see that a lot. I do get, a lot of gentlemen that are wearing ties, but he had a bow tie on, and I was very impressed by that. I thought it was really fashionable. But even though it's on Zoom, it shouldn't be treated any different than you're going in. So you need to dress professional. You need to, however you would present yourself, for an interview, then that's what you need to do. You need to, I had another interview where the guy showed up in a t-shirt and the neck was stretched out, and it reminded me of that commercial that we have on TV with a fabric softener where, he showed up for a blind date and his shirt stretched out. I'm like, oh yeah, that's what that is. So, I'm like,
Yeah. So well-groomed.
Yes.
Clothes that are well-kept and fit
That's
and
right.
are appropriate.
That's right. And I'm not saying, because not everybody wears makeup.
Right.
And not everybody fixes their hair a certain way. That's totally fine. I get it if it, if it's your preference, but at least everybody can, be well-groomed.
Right. Yeah. I completely agree. So I know being on time makes a great first impression too. So what do you recommend? Like, do people need to be early? I mean, what do you think about that?
I don't think they need to be too early, but I would say 5 minutes. Like, again, I'm old school. So if the interview's at 8 o'clock and you show up at 8 o'clock, to me, that is not on time. And I teach my kids this, even though, they're still young, you don't show up ready to work at 8 o'clock, to clock in at 8 o'clock. Same thing with interviews. If your interview is for 8 a.m., then you need to be there at 7:55 ready to go, because we have issues all the time. People, even though I'm used to conducting interviews via Zoom, there's still a lot of applicants that have never done that before. So either they can't get their camera to turn on, they can't get the volume to turn on, they'll be talking and we can't hear them, or vice versa. So then they have to get another device to utilize for the speakers or what have you. So in case there's any kinks like that, you want to be early. That way you're ready to go. You have it worked out and ready to go.
And then it's not pushed back, and
that's right.
Gets into everybody's day and all that stuff.
That's right.
Yeah. I completely agree. So have you had people that just decide not to show up at all?
Oh yeah. I had it happen this week. So it really happens, and has happened more since we have transitioned to Zoom since COVID. But I mean, yesterday someone showed up, or was a no-show to the interview. And when we reached out to them, they said, oh, I'm sorry, I completely forgot, but I don't want to pursue the interview any further. That's totally fine. We understand emergency situations come up. There's been times we've had people reach out and say, I'm sorry, I was in a car wreck, or whatever the case may be. It's fine. We understand. Life happens. Emergencies happen. But to just not show up, no show, you don't call. We reach out now. One of the things that we utilize in the application process is a text messaging system. So that's our first point of contact with these folks. And they can reply to that number and let us know, hey, I'm sorry, I was in a wreck, or I'm sick, or whatever the reason may be. But just to no show, it's disrespectful. And so you at least reach out and say, I'm no longer interested. No harm, no foul with that.
Keep everybody in the loop.
That's right.
Yeah. So say during your interviewing process, somebody ask the candidate a question and they just genuinely don't know the answer to the question. What do you prefer for them to say in response? Can you tell when somebody's faking it through an answer? Would you rather them just say, I don't know? I mean, how do you think that they should handle that?
Well, one of the questions that I ask every interview, I ask what someone's strengths are, what they would say their strengths are. And then I also ask weaknesses, or I like to say areas that you can improve. Because we all have those. And sometimes that does catch people off guard. Everybody's ready to talk about what their strengths are, but then when they have to really think about what can I improve on, they don't always necessarily know. And that's okay. I try to throw it back to it can even be something personal in your personal life. It doesn't have to be at work, but there's just sometimes that they just don't know. And I'll sit there and give them a minute to try to think of something. But then if at the end of it, they're like, I'm not sure, I'd rather you just say, I'm not sure.
Right. Then try to fumble your way through something.
That's right.
Yeah.
So you can always tell when folks have rehearsed the interview, so to speak, because I ask similar, it's kind of the same question, but I ask it 2 different ways, talking about your strengths to see how they answer it. And if they answer it word for word, the way they answered it the first time, then you can tell it's rehearsed.
Yeah.
So, it's just a conversation.
Right.
We're getting to know them just as much as they're getting to know us as an employer, because after the interview, they may think, oh, that is not somewhere I want to go work. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. It's not for everybody. So, people obviously are nervous. Yeah. That's understandable. I get it. I was nervous when I came and interviewed here, and I do that for a living. So, I understand, but it's just, I try to, reassure them and say, it's just a conversation. We're just trying to get to know you. You're trying to get to know us. And I ask questions that are kind of lighthearted, and depending on what they say, I may, ad lib with that. But, I'd rather hear from you as a person than what you've rehearsed with, someone else. So
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So then do you think it's important for the candidates to research before they come to their interview and know what the company is about, what they do?
I think so, because just like I said, in my opinion, they're interviewing us just as much as we're interviewing them. Mm-hmm. That was one of the things that when I came here, I had questions because the company I worked for was going through a merger. So I wanted to know more about that with credit unions. I had worked at a bank, so I wanted to know how that laid out with credit unions, because I didn't want to go through that again. Mm-hmm. So I feel like it's important to research who you're sending an application to make sure you see yourself as a fit there. But as far as, and then some of the questions that we do ask, we talk about, especially if it's like a CSR position, they're going to have to stand a lot. Mm-hmm. So I always ask, have you ever been into one of our locations? It's kind of a mixture. Some have, some haven't. But it's easier to explain if they have been into one of our locations because our setup is different. We have the pods versus the counter, that are in most banks. So it's easier to explain that you're going to be on your feet sometimes 8 to 10 hours a day. Mm-hmm. So if they've been into one of our locations, it's just easier to explain that, even if they aren't a member here, they've gone in just to see, mm-hmm. What it's about.
Yeah. So I have a little list that I wanted to run by you. Things that I wrote down as like absolute no-nos for a job interview. So I wanted to get your take on a couple of those. Okay. So lying about something, employers can easily double check.
Yes.
Does that happen?
Yes, it does.
Okay. I figured.
It does happen. So one of the questions that we have in the first interview is because at financial institutions, we do pull a credit and a background check. Mm-hmm. On the credit check, it's not based on a score. It has history only. So it doesn't mean that if there are any findings on either one that we will withdraw the offer. We just have to look at the history, kind of see what is lined out on the credit check or the background check, and we just kind of go from there. But I tell every single applicant in the interview the same thing. We've sent them the form ahead of time to get approval to pull that. And so I explain, we received your form authorization for credit and background check. We only pull this if we make you an offer and you accept. Are there any issues with credit or background that we need to know about? So it opens the door for them to explain, yes, I have student loans, I have medical issues that are out there, and those things are okay. We understand situations happen. That's not going to deter us from hiring you. We've even had background things come back where it's been, like a misdemeanor involving a car wreck or something like that. That's okay. but I would rather you tell me up front. We've even hired folks with bankruptcy, but if you tell me up front in the first interview, you know, I do have this on here. This was what was involved with me having to file bankruptcy. Then just to flat out and say, no, there's no issues.
Right.
Well, then I pull it and I have 7 pages worth of things that I'm like, okay, it's not just a no, because there's a lot of stuff out here.
Right.
But that can also mean, because I've also seen it to where their identity has been stolen.
Oh, wow.
I've had that happen. So then once we receive that, and there obviously are things, you can look at the dates on there and go back to the applicant and say, okay, this person would have been 12 at this time. So that's obviously not them.
Yeah.
Most of the time it's a parent that has stolen their identity. I've seen that. So,
wow.
Then, you know, obviously we would move forward with hiring them. We just give them a copy. Anytime we have any findings, whether they were upfront about it or not, we give them a copy of the report so that they can straighten it out on their own, because they do need to take care of whatever's out there.
Right. But regardless, be upfront.
Yes.
I mean, it's a major red flag if they're just willing to tell you a lie right from the jump.
That's
I
right.
would think.
Yes. That's right.
Okay, so another one I have. Bad-mouthing former employers.
It's not ideal. Obviously, we frown upon it. It just depends on the situation. If we know, you know, that there are things in the community that have happened to businesses, and we know that's where they're coming from, then we kind of expect it, you know, when we're asking them about why are you wanting to leave your current employer.
Right.
So it's case by case.
Okay.
So it just kind of depends.
Okay.
But if it's something that we know that this company has a good reputation, and they're just, you know, totally bad-mouthing, chances are likely you hire them, they're going to do the same about you.
Right.
So
That's kind of what I would think.
yeah.
Okay. Having your phone out on the interview table or having AirPods in your ear. What do you think about that?
I've never had the AirPods in their ear. Well, let me take that back. I have, because they couldn't get the audio to work on the Zoom interview.
Okay.
So that's different. But I have had when they come for either second or third interviews, if it's in person, I have had them have their phone out and even check it during the interview. No.
Oh, no.
Don't do that.
Don't do it.
If, you know, it'll be there when you get through. It's just not professional.
Well, too, and if it's sitting there, it's going to be a distraction. It's most likely going to vibrate or ring if you didn't turn it on vibrate. I mean, you know.
And if they don't have a case, then you can see it light up or, you know, whatever. So my advice is to just keep it away. Keep it in your car.
Yep.
The interview doesn't take but maybe 30 minutes at the most, and you can get back to your business.
Okay. Last one. So do you prefer that they ask questions at the end?
Oh, I love questions.
Okay.
Yes. That's a very good sign that they came prepared. So I've had all kinds, and, you know, and it's not a deterrent if they don't ask questions. It's not an issue, but it makes a very good impression when you do have questions, especially like non-generic questions.
Right.
You know, I mean, kind of the normal is like, well, what does it pay? What are the hours? But when they ask questions about like the insurance, 401k, you know, stuff like that, then that lets us know they came prepared. So
and that they're probably serious.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That they take this serious and that they really are looking to improve themselves.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've talked about a lot of good stuff. Do you have anything you want to add before we wrap up?
I don't. I think we pretty much covered everything. Yeah, I don't. And I'm good. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dee Dee, for being here today. I hope all of our listeners were able to learn some valuable advice for preparing for a job interview. Thank you for listening to our podcast, and tune back in next month for another episode of the Live Better podcast by Centric Federal Credit Union. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to ensure you never miss out on helpful tips. Like us on Facebook at Centric Federal Credit Union, and find us at MyCentric on YouTube, Instagram, Pinterest, and TikTok. You can find information about today's topic and more at mycentric.org. Centric is federally insured by the NCUA.